like the idea. And I'm going to give basically a high-level presentation of what Ethereum is as a technology, and then kind of organizationally how it is, including this IPO. And then I'm going to turn it over to Vitalik, who will answer sort of technical questions. So he's available, he's in Toronto on Skype. He's kind of waiting for us right now. And there's some very detailed things, and some of it actually hasn't even been established yet. So that's a little bit of the different thing about Ethereum, is that it's not just an altcoin that was kind of pushed out with some minor tweaks to Bitcoin. It's a pretty thorough examination of many of the protocol layer things that are involved in Bitcoin. And it was kind of put out there in a prototype form for feedback. So part of the reason even now some of the things you're seeing are not necessarily set in stone. They're sort of open for participation, and that's, for instance, the AMA that was just referred to on Reddit yesterday was along the same lines. It's, here's our plan, this is our best ideas at the moment, here's what we're planning to execute in the future on the basis of these ideas, but acknowledge that some of these things will evolve over time. So I'm going to zip through first the presentation that Vitalik did at Bitcoin Miami that gives an overview of the protocol. And fundamentally, there's a sort of anyone, I don't know who here considers himself an expert in Bitcoin, or maybe that's not it, like, who hacks on Bitcoin in their spare time and enjoys doing that. Okay, so it's not really who feels like they have a good understanding, generally, of the fundamentals of the Bitcoin protocol. Okay, so that's at least half of the room. So I'm going to give my own take on exactly how that is, but you know, Andreas Antonopoulos, who I'm sure most of people in the room know, is very fond of saying, you know, that Bitcoin is fundamentally a distributed consensus layer, an application layer for coming up with distributed consensus. And the currency app of Bitcoin is basically the first app that's been built on top of Bitcoin. But the actual process of distributed consensus has a lot of other applications that it can be applied to, and a lot of other people have tried to work on this in various ways. And so you've heard of probably proto shares or bit shares or Mastercoin or Next, or there's a lot of other people who are kind of doing this in different ways. And Ethereum is a fundamentally different way of doing this. And the way that Vitalik is fond of saying this is, when the internet first came out, it came out in the form of like HTML, and everyone was like adding on different tags and all this stuff. I'm sure some of you are involved in that, and it evolved in a certain way. And then someone said, what we really need to really now enable the functionality that we expect of the web is an embedded Turing complete language. And that basically means a fully functional computer language, and that's where we got JavaScript from. And the actual original form, JavaScript kind of sucked, and it's still, in some opinion, people design is not really optimal, but it was enabled a lot of advanced features on the web that just couldn't have been done with this sort of straight, flat XML-based protocol. So that's basically what the core insight of Ethereum is saying, instead of trying to build all of these things on top of the Bitcoin protocol, well, let me just go through how other people have tried to solve the same problem, because that gives you a little bit of perspective. So, Vitalik was involved also before he invented Ethereum in some of these other attempts. So obviously, if anyone's followed color coins and sort of these meta coins, there's a number of different kind of things that people have tried to do, and including these contract layer things and the decentralized autonomous organizations, which I'll get into a little bit more about that in a bit, because that's kind of like the next potential, the next.
Want me to dry for you?
No, fine. So color coins. So basically, there's like two main models that people have come up with for doing this. One is color coin model, and then basically, as hopefully most of you are aware, the way Bitcoin works is there's a distributed ledger of all the transactions that have ever happened, and that's how you basically get the amounts of whatever Bitcoins that people have, is replay the transaction history. And there's a fast way of doing that called simplified SPV, payment verification, that's based on sort of Merkle tree hashing. So it's fairly cryptologically heavy, but there's a way to do it in a fast way to verify that you have the right version of everything. And with every transaction, there's a little bit of metadata. Now that actually metadata has decreased over time because there's a problem of like bloat in the blockchain with the amount of information that could be stored there. But there's like basically two ways of doing it. One is that saying you sort of color these like a coin, and then basically you have trees in which different parts of the Bitcoin tree are treated differently. And the second one, and basically I'm only going to go in these very briefly, but if I'm not answering the question in enough technical detail and you want to get back into it later, save that in your mind because Vitalik is here and he has a lot of detailed understanding of why some of these solutions in the past have not worked optimally. So, and then the metadata, right? So encode MetaCoin data in the output. So basically you're attaching your own data into the blockchain. And then you have this huge problem is that so suppose you're launching your own coin, this is basically what Mastercoin is, on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. You have to parse all the data in the entire blockchain, decode it, and then see if like, for instance, the person who sent you the coin actually has that amount, which is very intensive. And you need a kind of centralized parsing mechanism. So you actually end up adding in this sort of centralized layer on top of what is ostensibly and should be a decentralized thing. So that's like a problem just from the outset, and it's not really clear that just because you've done that you've really enabled people to build this next generation of technology that's possible with this blockchain, this distributed consensus mechanism. So fundamentally, the people who are doing that, I'm actually not really sure what next right now because I think they do have something as far as distributed voting, but most of these things haven't really gotten very far fundamentally in allowing the secondary features, the second generation stuff. Simplified payment verification. So this is what I was just talking about, and how basically through Merkle trees you can go through and very easily verify. And yeah, basically all these things are difficult to scale because of this exact innovation that I mentioned. And so what Ethereum is then is, like I said, it's its own blockchain. So it's basically another Bitcoin-like thing, but it has an embedded Turing-complete language. And so the like idea of this is instead of trying to build all this stuff on top of Bitcoin, which people tried to do, and Vitalik was one of the people who tried to do this, if we just go back and sort of strip away some of the things that we don't even need in Bitcoin right now and embed this Turing-complete language, we can make it very, very easy to build stuff on top of it. And that's the idea, is to get to this sort of ease of use and this whole distributed idea. So like one thing that, for instance, I talked with Charles, who's also one of the core team members, earlier this week, and what he said is they're trying to have a platform for you to build your own apps on top of. So it's like the Android store for the blockchain. So instead of having someone controlling that process, which ultimately happens with every altcoin in some way, then you have a distributed platform layer, and then you put your little thing, whether it's a smart contract layer or whatever, like basically thing that your own currency, alt currency, or contract for difference, or some kind of derivative, or whatever kind of financial instrument or other thing that might actually, people are talking about decentralized Dropbox stuff. So a lot of things that are potentially possible on top of this Ethereum layer. And the goal is to give the end users, basically the people, hopefully some of you are actually considering building things, the ability to build that. So the contract, and I'm going to probably give some of this back to Vitalik in a little bit because I think it's important. But that we get some of the technical side of those for you who are interested in that. But fundamentally, and I'm going to actually skip to a slightly better version, more recent, colorful version of this. So here you have, well, I guess it's not really visible. Yeah, can we hit the lights?
Yeah, right here.
Right here?
Yes,
I don't know how visible this is. This is from the Ethereum website, so you're welcome to grab a piece. But basically, fundamentally, contracts are very expensive at this current moment in time to deal with, because every time you do a contract, you have to deal with a lawyer, right? And the lawyer is going to charge you for that, and there's a whole, maybe some additional benefits you get from being in the whole, whatever, all these legal protections or what have you. But in a lot of cases, you don't want to pay for that. And particularly in the developing world where there's not even a solid basis of rule of law, you may not even have that option. So, one of the things that you can do now, and this is like, I don't know how many of you, who knows what multi-sig is? That's not a familiar term? Okay. So multi-sig is basically, to open what I call like the Bitcoin piggy bank, right? You have your own address, you have a private key. Well, what if instead of having one private key, you needed there's 5 holes, and 3 of those 5 holes have to be you have to put the key in. That's basically what multi-sig is. So you have to put it in, then the funds are unlocked. And there's kind of a lot of cool things you can do with that. Is say, I want to pay, what's your name here?
Jay.
Jay. So I want to give Jay, a Bitcoin for producing a logo for me. Actually, Ethereum has a logo contest going on right now. Highly recommend participating. Very cool. But I want to say, okay, but I want to give it to you after, 2 weeks after, let's say Christian has verified that he actually received the logo. So that means, and that's like a very simple kind of idea, right, to what to do. After 2 weeks, after someone else has verified that that's there. But how can you do that today? You can't really do that in an easy way. You have to get a lawyer, you write a contract, you put it in paper, maybe it's legally binding, but what are you going to do to track it down anyway if it's not, etc. But with the whole idea of programmable money, is that you can just write it in and say, hey, after 2 weeks, this money goes to him if this guy says it's okay. And then he can also see that that money has been gone into the escrow account and is waiting there for him, once it maybe give some motivation to actually do what he says. So that's basically fundamentally the idea of a smart contract. And it's just, as far as I'm concerned, it's an extraordinary innovation that you can only have with programmable money. And one of the reasons I'm so excited about this. So, and this is an illustration of the technical details of how this works. So the contract, basically is living out there on the blockchain. It's encoded in the Ethereum scripting language, and that says that it's unlocked with these certain funds and will go with these certain signatures and will go to a certain person, and then one of the interesting things here, and this is I don't know how much detail I want to get into, but the Ether, is the currency in this. It's basically the fuel. It's kind of like the oil within the Ethereum ecosystem. So it's used Ethereum contracts and things they consume Ether. So there's an immediate value for it. So he's going to say for this contract he's going to send 10 Ether to this contract, which is going to say boom. It's going to turn on and authorize the withdrawal, and then after these other 2 people, it's going to confirm, okay, that this actual, money or whatever exists, and then it's going to confirm with these, people on the that these other people have verified, and then the outgoing money will be sent to the party that it's received by. I imagine none of you guys can see this very well, so but it is on the website, like I said. So that's fundamentally the technology set, and like I said, some things are not totally set in stone yet, because delivering your own scripting language and some of the other things that have made Bitcoin really interesting is kind of the mining, but I'm sure so many of you know there's been a lot of debate over different algorithms and the S-crypt or whatever, development of specialized hardware to do mining, and also mining pools because of the various, the benefits of that. And one of the things that Ethereum has been trying to do is find the best algorithm to make it sort of more democratic. And this is kind of a fundamental and I think important principle of Ethereum, is that is this idea of having things as decentralized and autonomous as possible. So the legal structure right now is a little bit up in the air, but it's going to have a few different non-profits who are established in different parts of the world. I think right now there's a Canadian one, and a Swiss one, and one in Panama, and I don't know when the U.S. entity is going to get going, but and what they're doing along those lines is a Mastercoin style fundraiser. I don't know if did anyone participate in the Mastercoin fundraiser by any chance? Okay, no. So basically, the way this works, it's really interesting. If you look at kind of how venture capital works, how fundraising works, is that you take, Bitcoin, and you send it to a certain Exodus address, is what it's called. And then basically it's received by the people who have that, and then they issue you, on the basis of the Bitcoin you contributed, a certain number of, in this case, Ether. So there's a certain conversion ratio that happens where you get, for your Bitcoin, the new currency units. And then the hope, obviously, is that your Bitcoin that you contributed is used for funding the development of that project, like any kind of startup situation, except that it's a direct kind of user to organization participation instead of all these middle layers like angels and VCs and all that sort of thing. So it's almost like crowd equity fundraising, if people are familiar with that trend. And then, obviously you're hoping that that goes up in value. So, and that's been the case with many of these launches. The Mastercoin launch, which happened last summer, was extraordinarily successful that way. I think the ROI was, 7% in the last, I was going to 700% in the last 6 months, maybe more than that, I don't know. So, so basically that's the fundamental model. And here, I'm going to give you some details on how that's working. So originally, the idea was that it was going to start February 1st, and basically the legal infrastructure for how to do this legally is very up in the air still, or at least it hasn't been pinned down. And originally they were going to do it in Canada, and then they realized that Swiss law accommodates it better because it can be called a currency sale, which the Swiss accommodate better, and then they can receive that and have a legally operating nonprofit. And still receive these funds in this kind of in this sort of broadly distributed way. So that is still something that I don't know if there's a final word yet on, but basically the model is that. So, and this is like the details of the fundraiser as originally announced. I don't know if anything is going to change when they have the final listing, but I suspect not very much. So the fundraiser lasts 2 months. Minimum investment is 0.01 Bitcoin. There's a max cap of 30,000 Bitcoin, which is about $30 million, or well, not now, but you can figure out what it is depending on the day and what Russia's done and everything else, or whatever. Mt. Gox scandal of the moment. So, basically the way it works, worth knowing for any of you who are considering participating, is the amount of Ether you get per Bitcoin contributed decreases over time. So if you come in at the beginning, you get this sort of 2,000, right, and then there's a sign of, and that's true for the first week of the fundraiser, and then it decreases a little bit over time, and then in the last week of the fundraiser you get 1,000 per Bitcoin. So obviously that's to encourage people to get in early on the fundraiser. One of the things that people haven't figured out to do yet with these kind of fundraisers is how to do like multiple rounds. So it's kind of like there's one round and that's it, and then you got like enough, hopefully enough funds to continue the thing for indefinitely. And oh, and another, this is really interesting. I should have mentioned this before probably, but Ether is actually one of the few cryptocurrencies that has a built-in inflation, or it's not really necessarily inflation, but it is an increase of the overall money supply at a steady linear rate. So this is true. Obviously, some other things like a doggy coin or Dogecoin or whatever has a very significant increase in supply. This is basically at the amount that is raised in the fundraiser, there will be a certain amount of Ether, 0.4 of that total, whatever, 40%, is going to go towards, is going to be the rate of increase in the overall Ether annually. So that's, I don't know quite how to, basically there's this is a complicated macroeconomic sort of thing based on the incentivization of why people would choose one thing over another and kind of promote. Basically within the Bitcoin world right now, there's multiple incentivization for different things. So one of them is like mining, right? You mine Bitcoin, you get some back. So there's like, and right now there's this prospect, and no one really knows exactly what's going to happen. I certainly don't. In that because the number of Bitcoins in existence is decreasing, and obviously you have an increase in kind of mining technology, at some point basically the only Bitcoin that will be able to be mined are from the transaction piece. And this also obviously makes, from a macroeconomic standpoint, Bitcoin sharply deflationary. So that means that, you know, ideally it's going to, or whatever, it necessarily, at least from the internal ecosystem, is going to go up in value, and then for certain degrees, you know, I don't know. There's a lot of like economic literature on this. I don't want to get into it. You can ask me questions about it if you want. But the short answer is that it basically the overall money supply of Ethereum or Ether increases at a fixed rate. And that basically means that there's net dilution in the foundership. So that's an interesting thing. Satoshi right now is going to always have a certain percentage of Bitcoin because it's, you know, has a set number. Whereas the actual founding shares of or whatever currency is going to decrease as a percentage of the overall volume. So it's interesting in that sense.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
So on the fundraising thing, is there a maximum limit, or is there
30,000 Bitcoins
for one person, or that's the whole thing?
Everyone.
So what about per donor? If you want this,
you know, I actually got the impression from this AMA that there would not be a cap on a per person. So I don't know how that would fit into
the democratic thing.
Well, that's a really interesting question. It was raised, and fundamentally, with this style, there's no way to know who is contributing. Even if we said that you can only contribute 1,000 Bitcoins or 500 Bitcoins or 10 Bitcoins, we can't tell which addresses are you. So
I think they're taking away the maximum cap. I don't think that's set in stone.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
It was
for that reason, because some people with a lot of Bitcoins could just hog all of the.
It would be a bad idea to buy it all because you'd be the only one holding it.
It would seem that way to me, yeah. But
amongst yourself swimming.
I don't know, but maybe someone would want to buy 30%. Maybe Satoshi wants to get it on the fundraiser, and Satoshi has a lot of Bitcoin, you know. So I don't know really what would happen in that kind of circumstance. So fundamentally, there's no easy way to prevent it from happening, even if you wanted to. So, but it is a concern, and other people have raised the same concern.
Just a quick question on this chart. After 5 years, what does it say there? The miners after 5 years here.
Yeah, right. So
60, 120. Now things are over 100.
So these are, yeah. What are
at the beginning, everything sums up to 100 probably. Right?
No, I hope so. I didn't make this infographic, but I know the person who did it, so I can figure out what's going on.
It says in millions. I believe it's assuming a certain amount that goes into it at first.
That's a good point.
these are numbers, not percentages.
They are numbers, and it must be assuming the max. I'm assuming he's assuming the maximum. Most people expect this to be oversubscribed as a fundraiser. So
it shows, for example, the 13.5 in the top graph being diminished in the lower graph, and more ether coming to the distribution.
Right. Miners. So these total numbers stay fixed as far as the number of ether they generate, but their percentage as a whole decreases. So I guess. So ether supply over time. So I said inflation over time. This is kind of interesting, also because the fixed, fundamentally, if you increase at a certain, like I said, it's linear inflation, but it's not a linear percent. It's a linear, it's a set number of Ethereum that are introduced to the pool over time. How this plays out for shaping the ecosystem, I have no idea.
Well, one would ask how that affects your initial investment when you have your investment diluted by 40% every year.
Right, and it's a very interesting question, both with respect to Bitcoin and other things like Mastercoin or whatever else. And I think the fundamental idea is that the actual use value of Ether will be so high because of this infrastructure, and that it will drive a lot of people to the ecosystem on that basis, so that the value will go up regardless of that particular.
Excuse me, guys. Vitalik has a time limit, and so he's ready now.
So yeah, while Vitalik is here, why don't we get some good questions?
All right. Vitalik, what do you think some of the first applications will be for Ethereum?
I think the first stuff that we're going to see is some of the more mundane applications. So I'm sure there's going to be people experimenting with stuff like escrows and financial contracts right off the bat. But I think the ones that will see the most usage are actually the ones that don't use Ether as a currency, but more just basically as a contract fuel. So things like decentralized file storage, things, the Namecoin contract, and so forth. The nice thing about those kinds of contracts is that people can benefit from them even if they don't really care about Ether the currency. So it seems like those are the ones that have the most potential to grow quickly.
Cool. Is there any work being done on a compiler for the scripting language?
Yeah, well, there already is a version of the compiler out. It's multisig.info:3000. At this point, it's not quite, well, there's still a few bugs in it, but the one thing that, because they're still looking at some possible changes to the language, so trying to make it more optimization friendly in some ways. Once that's sort of more solidified, I do plan on making another pass from the compiler, making sure it compiles everything properly, and then and at that point, once the compiler is done, we'll also work on the Python client so that you can actually take the Ether script and basically create transactions and blocks with it.
Cool. How does Ethereum avoid blockchain bloat?
How does what?
How does it avoid blockchain bloat?
Right now, the best solution. We're not really better than Bitcoin in that respect. So there is a fee system that encourages people to use space efficiently if they can. There is also this design where you can sort of start, if you have a client, you can start in the middle without having to download the entire blockchain because of the way the state tree and the transaction list are organized. I am actually looking at a few other different designs that Bitcoin developers like Gregory Maxwell and Peter Todd have been talking about, where we try and have multiple different blockchains that reinforce each other, but that's sort of more theoretical at this point. So I would say, with the state that Ethereum is in right now, the correct answer would be that it has the same properties with Bitcoin, plus a fee system, and plus because contracts are can do a lot of different types of cryptographic operations. There are actually clever ways where you can offload. You can store most of your data off chain, and then basically. So you would store most of your data off chain, and if you want to change the data in a contract, what you would do is you would send to the contract a transaction containing a branch of the tree that you want to change, and then a new branch, and the contract would do all the validation. So there are a lot of different tricks that you can use to reduce memory usage specifically, and so it's something that's very much under development, both in terms of the protocol itself and in terms of things that can be done on top of the protocol.
Vitalik, are there any exchanges that have expressed interest in trading Ether for Bitcoin or other currencies?
Well, you don't need exchanges to trade Ether for Bitcoin because you can basically put your Ether into a contract that automatically sends the Ether to the first person to send you Bitcoins. That's one of the nice things about Ethereum.
So it can read other blockchains?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, why not? All you need is, you can have an Ethereum contract validated Oracle branch. No, I don't see why you can't do that.
So could you, in theory, like burn Bitcoins and transfer Bitcoin itself onto Ethereum?
Well, I suppose if we wanted to have that as a plank of our issuance model, we could.
Well, not necessarily for the issuance model, but for actually transferring the Bitcoin
exchange, you mean?
Well, for actually transferring the Bitcoin blockchain onto Ethereum as like a subcurrency.
How would you burn? Proof of burn.
So do you mean like trading Bitcoins for Ether, or do you mean just actually destroying Bitcoins and then getting Ether in exchange for that?
Well, actually destroying Bitcoins on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then
you are talking about an issuance model.
Well, I'm talking about just moving Bitcoin over to Ethereum. So actually, like Ether Bitcoins would be issued rather than Bitcoin Bitcoins.
So why don't you aim your camera at the person's
definitely possible. Theoretically, it's even possible to do that in such a way that you can later take the Ether Bitcoins and turn them back into Bitcoins. It's something called a two-way cross-chain trade protocol, I believe. It's something that Matt Corello has been working on over the past 2 months.
Wow.
Do you see contracts being able to touch other parts of the internet, like web services, connect with real world in other ways?
Oh, okay. Right now, no. Basically, because the problem with that is if we made the contract language have like outputs for actually making internet connections, then first of all, it's potentially a huge security risk, and then second, it's also a consensus risk. Like what I see from gmail.com is not necessarily the same thing as what you see from gmail.com. You know, there's a reason why the website Down for Everyone or Just Meet.com exists. So it's there's some potential serious risks of consensus failures and blockchain forks if we would do that. But what we do, so in general, if you want Ethereum to interact with the outside world would have, like, the service on the outside world would actually have to format its API to make it Ethereum friendly. So if you wanted to have an Ethereum contract based off of a Bloomberg, you would, Bloomberg or some trusted third party would need to actually release a signed price feed where they would take the price and say the block number, and they would combine that with an elliptic curve signature or something similar, and then the contract would actually verify the signature. At this point, that seems to be the most practical way of doing that.
So about the fees on transactions, I see there's a number of different fees, and they're all some value X. Now, where's that X come from? Is that based off of the funding?
Right. That X is that's actually one of the questions that we're very seriously debating at this point. What is X? Yeah. So one idea we had is that we set X to be based on the mining difficulty. So it's an automatic formula that just automatically reduces the fee as the network gets more powerful. Now, more recently, we're thinking of some kind of voting system where basically the X is in the middle of basically miners can vote on whether X goes up or down in each block. We're also thinking of various different approaches based on network activity and targeting certain variables, but it's
so they'll be adjustable over time.
Yeah, it's like at this point we're probably like if no new information comes in, we'll probably go with some kind of voting mechanism where, say, X might start off at something like 0.0001 ether, and then every block a miner could sort of vote plus, in which case the fee would go up by like a 0.01%, or it could vote minus, and the fee would go down by 0.01%. And then on top of that, we could set the miners would be able to set policies which would be initially set by our clients. So in that way, it's sort of similar in some ways to how Bitcoin works with the way miners set fees, except the fees are mandatory, which of course they have to be, because otherwise some people would just put infinite loop contracts into the blockchain.
Right, and potentially if the fees were too low, somebody, and the value of the money went up really high, somebody could spend a small amount and cause everybody to do a large amount of computation.
Well, so the way contracts actually work is that you get your first 16 computational steps for free.
Right.
So the benefit of that is that you can't actually force a contract to lose money if the contract is written correctly, because the contract has those 16 steps of wiggle room within which you can decide, is this transaction worth processing or not. And in all of the examples in the white paper, what those first 16 spots are actually used for is to basically require the transaction to include a value large enough to pay for all the fees that would be needed to process it. So there's not really a way to attack contracts inside of Ethereum with transactions.
Well, what if the fee became relatively very low and inexpensive if the value of currency went up?
Well, if the fee becomes very low, then that's a good thing. The contracts can save money.
But then at the same time, I could purchase a large amount of processing power, and everybody would have to run it.
Well, no, you can't. Well, there's no such thing as purchasing processing power.
Well, you pay the fee, and you get to run cycles on the script.
Yes, right? Yes. So if the fee goes low, then at that specific time you can do a lot of computation. Yes.
Right.
So you can slow down the network somewhat.
So mainly that would be addressed by this X, which would adjust over time.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the miners would probably vote to increase it.
Vitalik, what will be the process for protocol changes for Ethereum in the future?
So if you look at the way the block header is structured, there's a field called extra data which seems to do nothing. So the idea is that if there is a need for a protocol change that we haven't thought of, we would basically say, this specific byte of the extra data field, so it could be like byte 16 or even some specific bit, represents this particular protocol change, and then miners could vote it up or down by setting that particular bit to 1 or 0. And it's similar to the way Bitcoin works, where if you reach a 75% threshold, then it enters this sort of phase in the middle, and then when it reaches 95%, then it basically changes over.
Awesome.
Hey, Vitalik, I have a question about, you came out with the Ethereum script 2, I think. And,
yes.
I don't think I quite understood the idea of the optimizations.
Right, so the idea there is that there's two kinds of optimization. There's space optimization and there's computational optimization. So space optimization basically says, there's going to be a lot of contracts that are extremely similar to each other. There's going to be a lot of financial derivatives contracts where the only difference is that some of the variables are different. There's going to be a lot of these decentralized Dropbox contracts where the only difference is the verbal root. There's going to be, and potentially the fee. And there's going to be a lot of contracts that might call some specific function. So the idea is that the deduplication system, which would we would design the scripting language in such a way that you can have these functions to be sort of cordoned off into a separate space, so that any contract would be able to take advantage of the function without having to copy it into itself. So basically, each individual contract, even if it's some advanced financial contract, might only really need to be something like a 50 or 100 bytes. So that's space optimization. Then time optimization basically is, what if they invent SHA-4 or some new crazy branch of quantum-proof cryptography, and then people decide that's something that we really want to use. So right now the only way to do that would basically be to write out the entire algorithm in Ethereum script, which could be very expensive. The fee might be something like 5,000x or whatnot, and that would be your only choice. So the idea here is that there would be a mechanism for actually promoting the operation, some given script into sort of being like an opcode. So the fee would drop down by a factor of 50 or 100, and potentially you would even be able to refer to it with like 1, 2, or 4 bytes instead of an entire hash.
So I guess but there's something to talk about initially starting out with Ethereum script to start with, and then it could.
And then basically, so the way that it would get optimized is that on the interpreter side, it would actually look. It would basically every time you go to some particular function, instead of actually evaluating the Ethereum script behind that function, it would just replace it with a machine code version. So instead of computing so at first you would compute SHA-4 by actually doing the stack pushing and popping in Ethereum script, but then that would switch over to machine code SHA-4. And theoretically, the two functions are exactly the same. So it doesn't really end. So from the outside, there would be no way to tell that it's actually using a heavily optimized machine version, or potentially even a hardware version.
It looks like it might take quite a few ethers to get a function promoted to machine code. So if you start to come out with SHA-4, then initially it would chew up a lot of ether in order just to use it.
It would take a lot. It would definitely take a lot of ether to do SHA-4 immediately. So one of the mechanisms that we're thinking for doing this sort of promotion is, once again, like we could have miners basically vote on it. So it's this sort of collective policy decision to say we have a better way. It really doesn't take 5,000 times as much effort to run SHA-4 because there's a machine code version. So we're going to slowly reduce it. We're going to force the fee on SHA-4 down, and we're going to turn it into an opcode, and on the back end, we're actually going to call some C++ or hardware version. So theoretically, the Ethereum scripts never actually need to get called.
I have another question, but I don't want to monopolize.
There was a question in the back before you asked yours.
I had a marketing question regarding like who are going to be the first primary users, and then how do you envision this expanding and scaling up as a business?
Yeah, I would say the first primary users are really just going to be the Bitcoin community, and to some extent also the community of other peer-to-peer protocols, things like BitMessage, BitTorrent, and so forth. And then over time, I would say, like for the first half year, we'll probably be mostly just. We do want to basically mostly target the geeks. We want to target the people who would build up the platforms, create the interfaces, build the infrastructure, and then eventually, like we as Ethereum don't necessarily need to be the brand. Ultimately, it's all about the applications. And so, if you can come up with some kind of decentralized application, it's your responsibility to create a good interface for it that the average person can use, and then you can essentially market that as a product all by itself. So people don't need to think that we're using some decentralized financial exchange on top of Ethereum. All people will see is a web interface exactly the same as something like Bitcoin, except in the back end it's backed by a blockchain instead of a server.
had another question, since I don't see anybody else asking. It seems like if you make the mining algorithm memory hard, such that normal people using it, and these normal people are, and a miner that you talked about is making lots of decisions. It sounds like a miner could be voting on the fees or which code is promoted from script to executable. It sounds like the miner could be a very different sort of person than the Bitcoin miner. Instead of having lots of hardware, it could be, me, for example, using my computer. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, in Bitcoin, even in Bitcoin, I would say miners are de facto setting the fees. So, and they're setting what the standard transactions are. So, Bitcoin is already a model of policy setting pretty much done by the mining community. But so miners are one option. Another option for that is to use some kind of proof of stake mechanism instead. So if we decide that miners are too specialized a class to be trusted, then we will basically put it up to the ether holders instead. So we have an entire group that's dedicated to thinking about economic questions. So ideally, like if we can come up with some kind of market mechanism to determine certain values automatically, that's what we prefer to use. It's just that sometimes there are all these different externality concerns, and it's pretty much impossible to do that in practice. So, and when that's the case, then basically, yes, we do need to figure out how to do that in the least optimal way possible.
I've got a question. What kind of timeline do you have for like a 1.0 version?
So for the release, it seems like it'll be something like Q3. I think if it gets to the point where it's going to drag on too long, then the other option we have is to release an Ethereum 1.0 and an Ethereum 2.0, where the 2.0 is where the 1.0 won't have all of the features necessarily. It'll be a good Turing complete blockchain, but then 2.0 will have a whole set of much more advanced scalability features, potentially including various different types of advanced cryptography.
Can you give an update on the IPO offering you guys are doing, and is there going to be a maximum cap? When do you think you'll
Can we elaborate on what, sorry?
The fundraiser.
Yes, so the fundraiser, right. So we are thinking of starting that at some points in March. At this point, basically, we are looking at some legal issues. We are setting the legal structure up in Switzerland. It's right now, basically the questions are exactly how long it'll take, and of course there's the question whether or not we can allow US people to participate from the US. So a lot of companies outside the US have obviously made the decision to block the US, and there are a lot of US laws that make a compelling reason to do that. But things are looking vaguely positive that we actually might be able to let people in. So that's one of the areas that we're thinking of. And then aside from that, it's like once all the legal stuff is sorted out, basically the major details of the fundraiser will be similar, although we are looking quite hard at the issuance model. So we are thinking of reducing the inflation rate. Andrew, yeah. So we're thinking of reducing the inflation rate, possibly doing things to the pre-mines and maybe inflation too, to basically give the people participating in the fundraiser or the pre-sale a larger share of the more money they put in.
What about the cap?
What about what?
The cap?
The cap, we're still thinking about that. There might be a cap, there might not be a cap. It's all a matter of whether or not we can come up with a plan of what we can do with various levels of money.
Will you not be able to participate in the fundraising anonymously?
Oh yes, you will be able to participate in the fundraising anonymously. I mean, it's Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah,
You could
just like tumble your funds through blockchain.info.
So then how would it be possible to block a U.S. participant?
It's the best we can do is pretty much the same thing as the Dice did, which is just IP address checking.
Oh wow, that's easy to get around.
Oh, I missed something here. Blocking U.S. participants? I'm sorry, I was
in the fundraising.
Okay.
Yeah. So as I was saying,
this is not just a
if
joke.
everything goes well, it's a lot need to do that, but that it's a legal thing that a lot of non-U.S. entities have ended up doing. So that's basically a matter of exactly what the legal advice that we get tells us.
I saw something earlier on this, and I thought it was just a joke. It was some Canadian-American thing, but obviously you're serious about it. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the SEC is a tough thing. You know, it's Ben Horowitz just recently wrote an article about how lucky he was not to go to jail. It's we do have to be careful, especially since I would say the reputation of the entire Bitcoin and DAC space is also on the line.
It kind of reminds me of poker sites that prohibit American players, but
right, okay,
they don't really stop people.
When you have the reserve currency, they treat it more seriously.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So is it true you might be coming to San Francisco?
Yeah, I'll be coming to San Francisco after the Texas conference, basically between that and the Bitcoin Summit.
Permanently or just to visit?
For like 2 or 3 weeks to visit.
I'll probably
have to end up hopping around the world.
I have a question about inflation. So, is it a constant rate of inflation? I was thinking like, if there was a cryptocurrency to conquer all currencies, you kind of have to have inflation matched with real growth, which is like...
Well, the problem is that's extremely hard. Like I would say, having a cryptocurrency whose issuance maps to its level of usage is pretty much one of the holy grails of cryptocurrency research. It's very hard. Right now, the problem we have is that for example, if 10 million coins get released, or if 15 million coins initially get released between the fundraiser and the green lines, then 4 million coins will come out every year. So it's linear. So the inflation rate will still tend to zero over time.
Vital, kind of a question. A lot of people here are interested, and obviously since the fundraiser isn't live yet, they can't contribute their Bitcoins. But what would you encourage people, particularly people who are interested in building apps, to do right now? Like what can be done on the testnet, for example?
Right now, not much. I would say if you want to experiment with building contracts, it's unfortunately you'll basically have to wait for me to get the compiler more fully checked out and start improve the Python clients so that we can actually test things. So hopefully that should be handled in a few days. So at the same time, right now, basically just read through the white paper examples, see if you can understand the language and what its features are. Start doing some pseudocode. Maybe even try creating some, at least start sketching out some simple decentralized services. So, for example, if any of you saw the Ponzi scheme on Ponzi.io, it's gone around a few times. You can implement that as an Ethereum contract. Try it.
I could also encourage people if they're interested to check out the Ethereum MeetUp groups. So the San Francisco Holon and the San Jose Holon will be having regular meetings.
Yeah, it's right. San Francisco Holon and San Jose Holon. How are those going, by the way?
Oh, things are going really well. There's a really active Skype group for people that have Skype accounts. You can let us know on the meetup group and you can get invited to it. There's also another private server that started, the Mumble chat server, so it's a little more secure than Skype.
Yeah, and we'll probably end up moving to that over time.
Yeah, then there'll be more announcements, I think, on the Ethereum.org website. I think we're at holland.ethereum.org is our page, and we'll keep organizing events and hackathons and other kind of things to do.
Yeah, and don't forget the Coin Summit, which is, I believe, March 26th in San Francisco, if anyone wants to attend that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and if you're
interested, I think we should also have some kind of Ethereum event, possibly connected to the Coin Summit, possibly not, but around that time. I see.
Yeah, the question I was asking when we got cut off was, who do you see as your biggest competition?
Do we see what?
Who do you see as your biggest competition?
I would say there are no. Well, there are obviously a few other projects that are trying to do somewhat similar things, but I think a lot of the companies or a lot of the projects that seem to be our competition are actually our cooperation. So something like Mastercoin, for example, we're trying to be a really low level protocol that you can build stuff on top of. They're an application specific financial protocol.
What do you
we can work together there.